Long ago, before the world knew Japan as it is today, the islands lay hidden in the mists of the Pacific. Steep mountains covered much of the land, their slopes thick with forests of cedar and pine. Valleys opened to rice paddies that gleamed like mirrors in the sun. Rivers flowed down from snowy peaks, feeding villages where farmers worked with bare feet in the mud. The people lived close to the earth and close to the sea. Fishermen cast their nets from small boats, hauling in shimmering fish. Farmers bent over the paddies from dawn to dusk, planting and harvesting rice, the grain that was life itself. But beyond the villages rose castles of wood and stone, perched on hills, their high walls guarding the lords who ruled the land. These lords, called daimyo, commanded warriors who swore loyalty to them. They were the samurai, men of the sword, men of discipline, men of honor. At night, when the wind carried the cry of owls through the forest, the people would whisper of battles, of swords that shone in the moonlight, of warriors who would rather die than betray their masters. Thus the legend of the samurai was born. The samurai were not only fighters, they were bound by a code, later called Bushido, the way of the warrior. This code taught loyalty to one's lord, respect for one's family, courage in battle, and discipline in life. To live dishonorably was worse than to die. A samurai would kneel in silence, his hand upon his sword, and declare that he would serve until death. Their weapons were sacred. The sword, especially the katana, was called the soul of the samurai, forged with skill and polished to a shining edge. It was more than a tool. It was a companion, a symbol of duty and spirit. The bow and arrow, too, were revered, for long before the sword, the samurai were masters of archery. They would ride on horseback, loosing arrows at full gallop, their movements as fluid as flowing water. But strength alone was not enough. A samurai also studied poetry, calligraphy, and the teachings of Zen Buddhism. To master the sword, one must also master the self. Japan in those days was ruled in name by the emperor, a figure of divine heritage, who lived in the capital at Kyoto. But the emperor's power was distant, like the sun behind clouds. Real power lay in the hands of the warriors. Great clans rose and fell, fighting for land, wealth, and influence. To bring order, one man took the title of shogun, the supreme military commander. Though the emperor still sat upon the throne, it was the shogun who held the reins of power. Under the shogun, the samurai became not just wandering warriors, but the backbone of government. Provinces were divided among daimyo, who pledged loyalty to the shogun. The samurai swore to their daimyo. Thus a ladder of loyalty bound the land together. Yet this order was fragile. Rival clans vied for supremacy. Alliances shifted and battles raged across the valleys and mountains of Japan. The clash of steel was never far away. When dawn broke, a samurai's day began with ritual. He would rise quietly, bow to the east where the sun lifted, and offer prayers. His armor hung ready, lacquered plates bound together with silk cords, strong yet flexible. Training was constant. Hours were spent in the dojo, practicing strikes and blocks with the wooden sword, the bokken. Meditation followed, stilling the mind as one would still the surface of a pond. But the samurai's life was not only war. In the evenings, he might write a poem, a so-called haiku, about the falling of cherry blossoms, or paint with brush and ink, for beauty and death were woven together. As blossoms fall swiftly from the tree, so too might a warrior fall in battle. Families of samurai lived within the castle walls. Wives and children managed the household while the men served their lords. Sons were trained from youth to ride, shoot, and wield the sword. Daughters learned poetry, music, and sometimes the art of defense. In the village below, peasants toiled, owing rice to their lord, who in turn fed and armed his warriors. Thus each class had its place: peasants, artisans, merchants, samurai, daimyo, shogun, and above all, the emperor, a pyramid of duty and loyalty. Though tales of the samurai are full of battles, much of their life was waiting. Months might pass in peace, while tensions brewed like a storm behind the mountains. Messengers came on horseback, scouts slipped through forests to watch enemy movements, smiths hammered new blades, and armorers repaired helmets dented from past wars. When war was declared, banners were raised, each clan's crest fluttering in the wind. Chrysanthemums, cranes, waves, and dragons, drums beat like thunder, and conch shells blew across the valleys, calling warriors to gather. At night, before battle, a samurai would sit silently by the fire. He would compose a death poem, for one never knew if dawn would be his last. To die with honor was to live forever. As the centuries passed, the power of the shogun waxed and waned. Great clans rose like waves, only to crash against the rocks of rival ambition. In the 15th century, Japan entered what would be called the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. It was a time when the old order broke apart, and daimyo fought endlessly for power. Castles sprang up across the land, built on hills and ridges, their walls strong, their gates defended by moats. Within, samurai sharpened swords, mounted horses, and prepared for the storms of battle. The land was divided. Clans like the Takeda, the Usugi, the Oda, and the Tokugawa clashed again and again. Villages burned, fields were trampled, and the sound of war drums echoed across the valleys. For the samurai, it was both a time of honor and of sorrow. To fight bravely was the highest duty, yet the endless wars brought suffering to common folk, who wished only to tend their rice and live in peace. The battlefield was not always an open plain. Many wars were fought in sieges, where armies surrounded castles, cutting off food and water. Inside the walls, samurai stood watch upon the towers, arrows ready, eyes fixed on the enemy below. Women and children worked alongside men, carrying stones to drop from above, boiling water to pour upon attackers. Outside, drums beat as enemy soldiers raised ladders, rolled siege towers, and fired flaming arrows into the night. Smoke rose, cries filled the air, and the clash of steel echoed against stone. Yet castles were built to endure. Their gates were thick, their walls steep, their defenders fierce. Many sieges lasted months, with neither side yielding until hunger and disease did what swords could not. A samurai trapped in such a siege would not despair. He knew that whether he lived or died, his duty was clear, to defend his lord to the last. In this era, the meaning of Bushido grew sharper. To live dishonorably was worse than to die. If a samurai was defeated, or if he brought shame upon himself, there was one path left, seppuku, the ritual act of taking one's own life to restore honor. It was not done in haste, but with ceremony. A samurai would dress in white, kneel upon a mat, and compose a death poem. Then, with steady hand, he would plunge a short blade into his belly, ending his life with courage. Another samurai, called the Kaishakunin, would stand ready to strike off his head swiftly, sparing him prolonged suffering. This ritual was feared, yet revered. It showed that honor was greater than life, and that a samurai's loyalty and dignity endured even in death. Among the countless battles of the Sengoku Jidai, few were as legendary as those between Takeda Shingen and Usugi Kenshin. Takeda Shingen, the Tiger of Kai, was a master of cavalry, his horsemen charging like thunder across the plains. Usugi Kenshin, the Dragon of Echigo, was a strategist of great brilliance, known for his sudden strikes and cunning plans. Again and again their armies clashed at Kawanakajima, a plain where the river met the mountains. Samurai met samurai, banners flew, drums thundered. It is said that in one battle, Kenshin himself rode straight into Shingen's camp, striking at him with a sword. Shingen, with only a war fan in hand, parried the blows until his men drove Kenshin back. Though neither side could claim victory, their rivalry became legend. The tiger and the dragon, locked in endless struggle, symbolized the spirit of the age. In time, a new leader rose, Oda Nobunaga, fierce, ruthless, and ambitious. He dreamed not of ruling one province, but of uniting all Japan. Nobunaga embraced new weapons brought from across the seas, guns. Portuguese traders had arrived with arquebuses, matchlock firearms that thundered and spat smoke. Many samurai dismissed them as dishonorable, but Nobunaga saw their power. At the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, Nobunaga arranged his gunners behind wooden barricades. As the mighty cavalry of the Takeda charged, the guns roared in volleys. Horses fell, warriors tumbled, and the charge broke upon the storm of fire. It was the end of an age. The sword and the bow still had honor, but the gun had entered the field, and war would never be the same. Nobunaga's rise was swift, but his fall was sudden. In 1582, one of his own generals turned against him. Nobunaga, trapped in a temple at Honnoji in Kyoto, was surrounded by flames. Rather than be captured, he chose death by his own hand. The temple burned, and with it, the man who had nearly united Japan. Yet Nobunaga's dream did not die. His generals continued the struggle. Among them was a man of humble origins, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who would rise from peasant to ruler. Hideyoshi was no noble by birth. He began as a servant, carrying sandals for his lord, but through cleverness, courage, and loyalty, he rose step by step. He proved his skill in battle, winning trust, and was granted command. In time, he succeeded where others had failed. He brought nearly all Japan under one rule. He built great castles, including the mighty Osaka Castle, with walls of stone that seemed to touch the sky. He reformed laws, organized society, and sought to secure peace. But even he could not escape the fate of men. In 1598, Hideyoshi died, leaving his young son too weak to rule. Once again, the land trembled with uncertainty. After the death of Hideyoshi, the dream of a united Japan wavered. His young son could not hold power, and the great lords began to circle like hawks. Among them was Tokugawa Ieyasu, patient and cunning. He had served under Nobunaga and Hideyoshi, and he knew both the ways of war and the weight of waiting. While others rushed to seize power, he built alliances, gathered strength, and watched. In 1600, all rivalries came to a head at the plains of Sekigahara. The fog lifted that morning to reveal tens of thousands of men, samurai in lacquered armor, ashigaru foot soldiers with spears, banners snapping in the wind. The battle raged from morning till dusk. Muskets thundered, arrows darkened the sky, swords clashed. Betrayals turned the tide. Some daimyo switched sides mid-battle, joining Tokugawa. By nightfall, the field was covered with broken banners and silent warriors. Tokugawa Ieyasu stood victorious. With that single battle, the wars that had torn Japan for over a century drew to an end. In 1603, Ieyasu was granted the title of shogun. Though the emperor still sat in Kyoto, it was Tokugawa who now ruled in truth. He established his capital at Edo, a fishing village that would, in time, grow into Tokyo. The Tokugawa shogunate would last for more than 250 years. Under its rule, the land was at peace. Samurai who had once lived by constant battle now found themselves serving as administrators, teachers, and keepers of order. The sword was not abandoned, but its edge was sheathed. The bow and musket still existed, but battles grew rare. The samurai's loyalty shifted from battlefield glory to the steady service of their daimyo in peaceful times. For the first time in generations, farmers could till their fields without fear of armies trampling their crops. Villages bustled again with markets selling rice, fish, silk, and pottery. Children played freely in the lanes, chasing dragonflies, flying kites, and watching fireflies glow in the summer dusk. Castles still stood, proud on their hills, but within their walls the days were quiet. Samurai trained still, drawing the sword, practicing strikes, riding horses, but many also took to study. They read Confucian texts, studied Zen, and wrote poetry. Some became poets and scholars themselves. Others served as judges, scribes, or teachers for the children of the clan. Honor remained their guide, but their role had shifted. They were no longer only men of war, they were men of order, guardians of peace. It was said that a true samurai should be skilled in both the sword and the brush. To master war without mastering the mind was to be only half a warrior. Thus, in Edo times, samurai wrote poetry in the still of the night. They painted landscapes of mountains shrouded in mist, or simple ink sketches of a single bamboo stalk swaying in the wind. Some found solace in the tea ceremony, where every movement, the pouring of water, the turning of a cup, the placement of a flower, was done with calm precision. Others sat in Zen gardens, raked gravel like waves around stones, the silence broken only by the call of a crow or the rustle of leaves. The blade remained their companion, but the spirit of the samurai was as much in stillness as in action. To preserve order, the Tokugawa shogunate closed Japan's borders to most of the outside world. Foreigners were few, and Japanese were forbidden to leave. The land turned inward, shaping its own arts, culture, and traditions without the turmoil of foreign wars. Traditional Japanese theaters called kabuki filled with drama and color. Haiku poetry masters like Basho wrote of frogs leaping into ponds, of autumn moons, of the quiet beauty of the fleeting world. For ordinary people, life followed the seasons. Planting, harvesting, festivals, and rituals marked the passing of time. Samurai walked among them, less feared than before, but still respected as the pillars of duty and discipline. Yet peace carried its own burden. For samurai whose identity was bound to battle, centuries without war brought questions. What was the purpose of a warrior with no wars to fight? Some grew restless, wandering as ronin, masterless samurai, seeking new paths. Others served faithfully in bureaucratic roles, though their hearts longed for the clash of arms. The code of Bushido endured, but it was tested not by death in battle, but by life in service, day after day, year after year. To be loyal in peace was perhaps a harder trial than to be brave in war. For over 2 centuries, the Tokugawa shogunate held firm, but the world beyond Japan was changing. Ships with black smoke and iron hulls sailed the seas. Nations grew powerful with new machines and weapons. In the 19th century, foreign ships arrived at Japan's shores, demanding trade and entry. The old order trembled. Samurai once more found themselves called to arms, not against rival clans, but against the winds of change blowing from across the ocean. By the late 1800s, the age of the shogun ended. The emperor was restored to power in what became known as the Meiji Restoration. The samurai, once the backbone of Japan, faded as a class. Swords were outlawed, and the warriors laid down their arms. Yet the spirit of the samurai did not vanish. It lived on in memory, in culture, in the ideals of loyalty, courage, and discipline that still inspire Japan today. Now, imagine the samurai's world as it quiets. The battlefield is silent, the banners furled, castles stand against the sky, their stones warmed by the sun. In the fields below, farmers work, their laughter carried on the wind. A lone samurai sits by a river, his armor set aside. In his hands is not a sword, but a brush. He writes, "Cherry blossoms fall. Sword sleeps in the scabbard's dark. The world is at peace." The age of the shogun has ended, but the story of the samurai remains. Close your eyes now and hear the faint echo of swords clashing, of drums beating, of banners snapping in the wind. The age of the samurai was an age of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice, but also of beauty, poetry, and peace. As night falls, those echoes fade, leaving only the hush of wind in the bamboo, the ripple of water in the rice fields, the soft fall of cherry blossoms. Sleep gently, for the warriors have laid down their arms. The battles are done, and history itself drifts into slumber. Rest now, in the silence after the storm. The palace of Versailles was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Its gardens stretched so far that even the strongest walker grew weary before reaching the end. Fountains glittered like diamonds in the sunlight, spraying arcs of water into the air. At night, torches lit the paths, and the scent of roses drifted through the windows of golden rooms. Inside, ladies in silken gowns moved like colorful birds, their laughter ringing above the notes of violins. Courtiers bowed deeply as the king passed, careful to keep their words flattering. In such splendor, it was easy to forget that only a few miles away farmers dug at hard soil, their hands blistered and their stomachs hollow. Little children in villages played with wooden sticks because toys were rare. Mothers tried to stretch a small loaf of bread to feed 6 mouths. Fathers returned from fields exhausted only to be met with the sight of unpaid debts pinned to the door. This was the contrast of France in the 1780s, a nation divided between glitter and hunger. The king himself, Louis XVI, was not a cruel man. He was shy, awkward, fond of locks and hunting more than of politics. His queen, Marie Antoinette, adored fine clothes, music, and theatre. She was mocked for her extravagance, though she was far from the worst spender at court. Still, her Austrian birth made her suspect in the eyes of many Frenchmen. In Paris, coffee houses buzzed with talk. Men sat at small wooden tables, sipping bitter drinks while arguing over pamphlets. One young man, his hair powdered white, leaned across the table. "Have you read Rousseau? He says men are born free, yet everywhere they are in chains. Chains! That is what we are." Another answered, tapping the paper. "And Voltaire, he writes, against superstition, against tyranny. Can you not see? We must change everything." The air in France was restless. No one could say exactly what was coming, but all could sense that the old world was cracking. When the king called the Estates General for May 1789, Villages across France stirred with excitement and fear. For the first time in living memory, common people would send their voices to Versailles. Elections were held in local churches and town halls. Farmers removed their hats as they spoke. Merchants wrote down lists of grievances: high bread prices, unfair taxes, endless privileges of nobles and priests. In many places, people who had never before been asked for an opinion suddenly found themselves holding a quill, scratching out words that might reach the king. At Versailles, the gathering was splendid. The clergy in long black and red robes, the nobility in embroidered coats with glittering buttons, and the commoners in plainer suits, all filed into the great hall. But the imbalance was plain: one vote for the clergy, one for the nobility, one for the commoners. It did not matter that the third estate represented nearly 98% of the nation. Numbers meant little when tradition gave power to privilege. The debates grew heated. One day, Abbé Sillet, a priest with sharp eyes and a sharp pen, rose to speak. His pamphlet had already spread far and wide. What is the third estate? His answer had burned itself into the minds of many. He declared, "The third estate is the people. The people are everything. Yet until now, they have been nothing. It is time they become something." Murmurs spread through the hall. Some nobles scoffed, others looked uneasy, but among the commoners faces lit with hope. Still, the king wavered. He wanted reform, yet feared change. He wanted order, yet could not command it. In his hesitation, the tide of history swelled. On a hot June morning, the doors to the assembly hall were locked. Guards stood firm. The commoners whispered angrily among themselves. Was this the king's answer? To silence them? Together they marched through the streets of Versailles, the crowd of deputies swelling. They found a long, plain building, an indoor tennis court. The wooden floor echoed under their feet as they gathered inside. Windows let in shafts of dusty light. Sweat beaded on their foreheads. There they made a vow. One by one, each man stepped forward, raising his hand. "We swear not to separate until we have written a constitution for France." Imagine the sound, hundreds of voices repeating the words, firm and solemn, some with trembling hands, others with fiery passion. That oath bound them together more strongly than any chain. From that moment, they were no longer petitioners before a king. They were builders of a new nation. Paris was restless. Bread prices soared. Fear gripped the people. Rumors flew faster than pigeons. Soldiers were coming. Foreign armies would crush the revolution. The king would arrest the deputies. Crowds gathered in the streets. Arms were needed. Eyes turned toward the Bastille, the ancient fortress that loomed over the city. It was not its prisoners that drove them, for only a few remained inside, but its meaning. To the people, the Bastille stood as the fist of royal tyranny. On July 14th, 1789, the crowd surged toward its gates. They demanded the weapons stored within. Negotiations dragged, tempers flared, shots rang out, smoke filled the air, shouts rose higher, and the mob fought with desperate fury. At last the fortress surrendered, its governor was seized and killed. The keys to the Bastille were raised high in triumph. The news spread like fire across the land. In the countryside, peasants armed with scythes and torches attacked manors, burning records of feudal dues. A great fear gripped the nation, but it was a fear that turned against the old order. The French Revolution had begun. The Bastille had fallen, but bread was still scarce. Winter winds swept across France, and hunger gnawed deeper. In Paris, women waited in endless lines outside bakeries, clutching coins that bought less and less. When no bread appeared, they returned home to hungry children. The National Assembly worked feverishly in Versailles, writing laws and decrees. On a single August night in 1789, noblemen rose one after another, their voices solemn, and renounced their privileges. A marquis gave up his hunting rights, a count his exemption from taxes, a bishop his feudal dues. Torches flickered as centuries of tradition seemed to vanish in hours. The Assembly soon published a document meant to guide the new order, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Its words were bold, its sentences crisp like trumpets. All men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Social distinctions may be founded only upon the common good. The declaration spread quickly. Copies appeared in marketplaces and taverns. Young men read it aloud in town squares, their voices rising: liberty, equality, fraternity. And yet, for all its promises, the peasants still starved. On October the 5th, 1789, dawn broke over Paris, with clouds heavy and grey. The markets were restless. Women muttered angrily as they saw the price of bread climb once again. Soon their muttering became shouting. Bread! Bread for our children! One woman seized a drum and beat it furiously. Others grabbed sticks, pikes, and kitchen knives. Within hours, a sea of women surged through the streets. Fishwives with strong arms, washerwomen with rolled sleeves, young girls shouting, old women limping but determined. "A Versailles!" they cried, "to the king!" The march stretched nearly 20 kilometers. Rain poured, soaking skirts and cloaks, but their anger burned hotter than the storm. As they approached the Grand Palace, soldiers hesitated. Who could fire upon mothers and daughters crying for food? Inside Versailles, Marie Antoinette paced nervously. Once adored as a princess, she was now mocked as Madame Deficit, blamed for the kingdom's debts. Rumors painted her as heartless, whispering she had once said, "Let them eat cake." She had not spoken the words, but the rumor clung to her like a curse. The mob crashed through the palace gates. They stormed the halls, searching for the queen. Muskets cracked, swords clashed, but at last the crowd poured into the royal apartments. King Louis had little choice. He stepped onto a balcony before the crowd, pale but calm. "I will go to Paris," he announced. The roar shook the walls. The queen appeared beside him, defiant despite her fear. For a heartbeat, silence fell. Then someone shouted, "À Paris!" to Paris. And so the king and queen were led back to the capital, no longer masters of Versailles, but captives of the people. The years that followed were uneasy. The National Assembly transformed into the Legislative Assembly. Clubs formed. The Girondins, with their polished speaks, the Jacobins, with their fiery demands. Outside, the sans-culottes, the workers of Paris, grew restless and radical. Foreign powers looked on with alarm. Monarchs in Austria and Prussia trembled, fearing that revolution might leap their borders. Some encouraged Louis to resist, whispering promises of aid. In June 1791, the royal family disguised themselves for escape. Marie Antoinette wore a simple dress. The king donned a plain coat. They slipped out of the palace by night, their carriage waiting. Horses clattered on cobblestones as they sped toward the eastern border. But fate betrayed them. At the town of Varennes, a postmaster recognized the king from his portrait on coins. "It is Louis," he cried. Soldiers surrounded the carriage. The family was arrested and brought back to Paris under the eyes of silent crowds. To the people, there was no longer any doubt. Their king had tried to abandon them. By 1792, France was at war with Austria and Prussia. Cannon fire thundered along the frontiers. At first, French armies faltered, retreating in confusion. Rumors spread that traitors and aristocrats were sabotaging the cause. In Paris, fury boiled. On August 10th, 1792, crowds once more surged through the streets. They stormed the Tuileries Palace where the king now lived. Swiss guards fought bravely, but the mob overwhelmed them. Blood stained the marble floors. The royal family fled to the assembly, seeking protection, but their crown had fallen. The monarchy was suspended. Louis and Marie Antoinette were prisoners now, locked away in the Temple, a grim medieval fortress in Paris. That September, as foreign armies advanced, panic struck the capital. Citizens feared that prisoners within Parisian jails might rise in revolt and aid the enemy. Crowds broke into the prisons and slaughtered hundreds. The September massacres drenched the city in blood. The revolution, once full of lofty promises, was now gripped by fear. Winter came, cold and unrelenting. In December 1792, the National Convention put Louis XVI on trial. He was charged with conspiring against the liberty of the nation, with betraying the people he had sworn to protect. The courtroom was packed. Deputies sat sternly, papers before them. The king listened quietly, his face pale but calm. He defended himself with dignity, insisting he had always sought the people's good. But the verdict was inevitable. By a majority of votes, the convention declared him guilty. His punishment, death. On January the 21st, 1793, Louis was led to the guillotine in the Place de la Révolution. Crowds gathered, silent and vast. Drums beat a steady rhythm. The king mounted the scaffold. He turned to the people and spoke. "I die innocent of all the crimes imputed to me. I forgive those who are the cause of my death. I pray that my blood may cement the happiness of the French." The executioner bound him. The blade shimmered. With a crash it fell. The crowd erupted, shouting, "Vive la République!" Yet even in their cheers, many wept. The world of kings had ended. Marie Antoinette lingered in prison for months, watching her children taken from her one by one. Her hair turned white with sorrow. In October 1793, she too was brought to trial. Once the most glittering queen in Europe, she now rode in a rough cart, her hands tied, her dress plain. Crowds cheered as she passed, yet some stood silent, remembering her once as a young bride. She spoke little during her trial. When accused falsely of crimes against her son, she raised her head proudly. Nature refuses to answer such a charge made against a mother. On October the 16th, she mounted the scaffold. She stumbled once, accidentally stepping on the executioner's foot. "Pardon me, sir," she said softly. A moment later, the blade fell. The revolution had consumed its king and queen. The execution of Louis XVI shocked Europe. Kings and queens everywhere trembled. If the people of France could rise against their monarch, what would stop their own subjects from doing the same? Coalitions of foreign armies massed on France's borders. Austria, Prussia, Britain, Spain, all swore to crush the revolution. Cannon thundered, drums beat, muskets fired in long rows. French soldiers, many still farmers in tattered boots, marched to defend their new republic. Paris became a furnace of determination. Men shouted, "To arms, citizens!" Women sewed uniforms. Children collected scrap metal for bullets. The song of the Marseillaise, fierce and defiant, echoed through the streets. "Aux armes, citoyens, formez vos bataillons." The revolution was no longer just politics, it was survival. In the National Convention, factions fought like wolves. The Girondins wanted moderation, cautious reform. The Jacobins, led by Maximilien Robespierre, demanded purity and complete devotion to the cause. Robespierre was a small man with sharp features and a piercing gaze. Once a quiet lawyer from Arras, he had become the incorruptible, admired for his honesty and feared for his intensity. To him, virtue and terror were twins. One could not survive without the other. The Republic, he declared, can be saved only by virtue and by terror. Terror is nothing but prompt, severe, inflexible justice. The guillotine, once a rare spectacle, now became a daily rhythm. Aristocrats, priests, and suspected traitors were dragged through the streets in carts. Crowds gathered in the Place de la Révolution, some cheering, some weeping, as the blade fell again and again. The revolution that had begun with dreams of liberty now marched under the shadow of fear. From 1793 to 1794, the reign of terror spread across France. Committees drew up lists of enemies of the people. To be accused was often to be condemned. A careless word, a look of doubt, even silence could be fatal. In Paris, the guillotine stood busy from dawn until dusk. Nobles, priests, merchants, poets, even revolutionaries themselves all met the blade. Among them was George Danton, once a fiery leader who begged for moderation. "The revolution devours its children," he warned. He too was executed. The writer Olympe de Gaulle, who had demanded rights for women, perished as well. So did Camille Desmoulins, a brilliant journalist and Robespierre's old friend. Meanwhile, in the countryside, uprisings flared. In the Vendée region, peasants and royalists resisted the Republic. Civil war raged, brutal and merciless, and yet for all the blood, French armies began to win. In 1794, they defeated the coalition at Fleurus. The Republic, though scarred, stood strong. But the terror had gone too far. Whispers grew that Robespierre himself was a tyrant. Deputies who once trembled before him now plotted his downfall. On July 27th, 1794, the convention erupted in chaos. Robespierre tried to speak, but his enemies shouted him down. Cries of "Down with the tyrant" filled the air. That night, he and his allies were arrested. The next day, they were marched to the guillotine without trial. Robespierre, wounded in the jaw from a failed suicide attempt, could not speak as the blade fell. With his death, the terror ended. Paris exhaled, weary of blood. A new government rose. The Directory, ruled by 5 directors, it promised stability after years of chaos, but corruption seeped into its halls. Politicians grew rich while the poor still starved. Inflation soared, fortunes rose and fell overnight. In the streets, gangs of royalists clashed with gangs of radicals. The dream of equality seemed to fade into squabbles and scandals. And yet one figure shone brighter than the rest, a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was born on the island of Corsica, far from the glitter of Paris. Short, sharp-minded, and fiercely ambitious, he rose quickly through the ranks of the army. His victories in Italy stunned Europe. Soldiers adored him, called him the Little Corporal, for sharing their hardships. In 1798, he led an expedition to Egypt, battling both armies and ancient sands. Though the campaign faltered, his legend only grew. By 1799, France was weary. 10 years of revolution had left the nation exhausted. The Directory was despised. The people longed for order. On November 9th, 1799, the 18th of Brumaire, in the new revolutionary calendar, Napoleon seized power in a swift coup. The revolution's decade of chaos ended in the firm grip of one man. And so the French Revolution closed not with the voice of the people, but with the march of soldiers under Napoleon's command. Yet its echoes did not fade. The ideas born in those fiery years, liberty, equality, fraternity, would spread across Europe and the world. They would inspire revolutions in Haiti, in Latin America, and far beyond. The revolution showed that common people could rise against kings, that ideas could shake thrones, that even in terror and blood, the dream of a freer world could survive. And so ends our bedtime story, the night the people rose. A tale of hunger and hope, of glittering palaces and broken bread, of oaths sworn in hot courts and blades falling in cold squares, a tale of a nation that dared to dream of liberty and paid a heavy price. The streets of Paris, once filled with drums and shouting, grew still as the years passed. The guillotine no longer stood in the square. The chants of crowds faded into whispers of memory. Imagine the city at night. The lamps flicker softly along the Seine. The river flows calmly, carrying reflections of bridges and stars. The air is cool, touched by the faint scent of bread from a nearby bakery. Somewhere a mother hushes her child to sleep. A candle burns low in a window, its flame steady, like a heartbeat. Horses' hooves clop faintly in the distance, then fade. The stones of the city, scarred by revolution, rest in silence. And you too may rest. The chaos has passed. The story has ended. The voices of the past grow quiet, leaving only peace. Close your eyes. Let the night cradle you. The world is still. Tomorrow is far away. Tonight you are safe. Tonight, let us sail back more than 3,000 years to a time of heroes, gods, and one of the most famous wars ever told. It's called the Trojan War. This is not just a story of battles, it is about choices, pride, love, friendship, and fate. It is about kings and queens, mothers and fathers, warriors and dreamers. The story was first told in poems and songs by ancient Greek poets. The most famous are Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, written nearly 2,800 years ago. But tonight we will tell it as a long, gentle bedtime story, easy to follow, with every name explained, so you can simply relax and drift along. Close your eyes and imagine the sound of waves against the shore, the flicker of a fire, and a storyteller's calm voice. The Trojan War began not with a battle, but with a wedding feast. A sea goddess named Thetis was marrying a mortal man named Peleus. Their son would one day be Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior. The gods of Olympus, Zeus, Hera, Athena, Aphrodite, and many more were all invited to the wedding. But one goddess was left out, Eris, the goddess of strife and quarrels. Angry, she came anyway and tossed a golden apple among the guests. On the apple she wrote, "For the fairest." 3 goddesses claimed it. Hera, queen of the gods and wife of Zeus, she represented power and royal authority. Athena, goddess of wisdom, war strategy, and learning. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. They argued fiercely. Zeus, the king of the gods, did not want to choose between them, so he sent them to a mortal prince, Paris of Troy. Paris was the son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy, a wealthy city in Asia Minor, modern Turkey. He was known for his fairness and gentle nature. Each goddess offered him a gift if he chose her. Hera promised him power and kingship over great lands. Athena promised him wisdom and victory in every battle. Aphrodite promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris thought carefully. At last he chose Aphrodite and gave her the golden apple. With that choice, the seeds of the Trojan War were planted. The woman Aphrodite had promised was Helen, known even then as Helen of Sparta. Helen was the daughter of Zeus in myth and Queen Leda, and was said to be the most beautiful woman alive. Poets later wrote, "The face that launched 1,000 ships." She was married to King Menelaus of Sparta, a powerful Greek ruler. Menelaus loved her deeply and was proud of his queen. When Paris traveled to Sparta, he was welcomed as a guest, but with Aphrodite's influence, Helen left with Paris and sailed to Troy. Some say she was enchanted by the goddess. Others say she went willingly. Either way, her departure enraged Menelaus. Menelaus turned to his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, the most powerful Greek leader. Together they called upon all the Greek kings and princes who had once sworn an oath to defend Helen's marriage. The Greek leaders who answered the call became legends. Agamemnon, commander of all the Greeks, proud, ambitious, and determined to win glory. Menelaus, Helen's husband, who sought to bring her back and punish Troy. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, clever and resourceful, more famous for his mind than his sword. Nestor, the wise old king of Pylos, who advised the younger warriors. Ajax, the great, a giant of a man, second only to Achilles in strength. Diomedes, fierce in battle and favored by Athena. Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, unmatched in speed and skill, but proud and quick to anger. Agamemnon gathered a fleet so large that poets claimed it had 1,000 ships. The Greeks prepared to cross the Aegean Sea and lay siege to Troy, but the winds were still. A seer said the goddess Artemis was angry, and only a sacrifice would please her. Agamemnon, in a terrible choice, gave up his daughter, Iphigenia. The winds rose and the fleet sailed. Let us pause and meet the Trojans, who would defend their city for 10 long years. King Priam, wise and gentle, beloved by his people. Queen Hecuba, strong in sorrow, mother of many children. Hector, eldest son, commander of the Trojan army, noble and brave. Paris, whose choice began it all, handsome but not as strong as Hector. Cassandra, a daughter gifted with prophecy by Apollo, but cursed so no one would believe her. Aeneas, a cousin of the royal family, destined to survive and later become a hero in Roman stories. Troy itself was rich and strong. Its walls, said to have been built by gods, towered high and kept the city safe. Behind them, people lived in prosperity. The Greeks landed and surrounded Troy. Battles raged on the plains between the city walls and the Greek ships. For 9 years the fighting continued. Sometimes the Greeks won ground, sometimes the Trojans pushed them back. The gods themselves took sides. Hera and Athena favored the Greeks, still angry at Paris. Aphrodite and Apollo favored the Trojans. Zeus tried to stay above the conflict but could not resist his children's pleas. The war was not endless slaughter. Often there were truces, duels between champions, feasts and negotiations, but year after year no side could claim victory. The Greeks' greatest warrior, Achilles, was key to their success, but pride brought disaster. Agamemnon insulted Achilles by taking from him a prize of honor, a woman captured in war. Achilles, furious, withdrew from battle and refused to fight. Without him, the Greeks faltered. The Trojans, led by Hector, pressed hard and burned Greek ships. Achilles' closest companion, Patroclus, begged to help. He put on Achilles' shining armor and led the Greeks into battle. For a while the Trojans believed Achilles had returned, but Hector killed Patroclus. When Achilles learned of his friend's death, grief consumed him. His rage returned, and he rejoined the battle. The duel between Hector and Achilles is one of the most famous moments of the war. Hector stood before the gates of Troy, knowing his fate but refusing to hide. Achilles, burning with fury, struck him down. In his anger, Achilles dishonored Hector's body, dragging it behind his chariot. But later, King Priam came secretly to the Greek camp. He knelt before Achilles and begged for his son's body. Achilles, moved by the old king's sorrow, returned Hector for burial. For a brief moment, Enemies shared their grief as fathers and sons. Still, Troy stood strong. Its walls had not fallen. At last, the cunning of Odysseus found a way. The Greeks built a huge wooden horse, hollow inside. They left it on the shore and sailed away, pretending to abandon the war. The Trojans debated what to do. Cassandra warned it was a trap, but as always, no one believed her. They brought the horse inside as a trophy. That night, Greek warriors hidden within climbed out, opened the gates, and signaled their fleet to return. The Greeks stormed into the city. Troy burned, Priam was killed, the people were scattered, and Helen, whose beauty had sparked it all, was taken back to Greece. The Trojan War ended, but its stories lived forever. Some heroes never returned home. Odysseus wandered for 10 years more, facing monsters and gods before reaching Ithaca. Aeneas fled Troy and, according to Roman legend, became an ancestor of Rome's founders. The war taught lessons of pride, fate, and the power of choices. And now, as the firelight fades, picture the ruins of Troy under starlight. The voices of warriors are silent. Only the wind whispers through the stones. The story of the Trojan War is not just about victory or defeat. It is about human hearts, love and jealousy, bravery and sorrow, mistakes and forgiveness. Rest now, with those echoes fading into dreams. Good night. Tonight, let us travel far back in time, to a land of sweeping grasslands and endless skies. This is the story of the Mongol Empire, an empire born from the winds of the steppe, carried by horses and arrows, and guided by the vision of a single man who began life with almost nothing. The Mongol Empire grew to become the largest land empire in history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe. But it is not only a story of battles, it is a story of families moving with the seasons, of merchants crossing deserts, of scholars and artisans, and of the ways empires rise and fall. So lie back, close your eyes, and imagine the sound of hooves echoing across an endless plain, under a sky bright with stars. The Mongolian steppe is vast, a sea of grass with no walls or fences, only the horizon. Here winters are long and bitter, winds cutting across the land like blades. Summers are dry and hot, with storms rolling suddenly across the plains. Life on the steppe is hard, but it breeds resilience. Families live in round felt tents called gers or yurts, which can be packed and moved as the seasons change. Herds of sheep, goats, yaks, and horses provide food, milk, and clothing. Children learn to ride almost as soon as they can walk. Horses are life itself, transportation, companionship, even warmth on freezing nights. Archery and hunting are skills taught yearly, for survival depends on them. This was the world that shaped the Mongols, a people hardened by nature, but also bound together by community, loyalty, and tradition. Into this world, around 1162, a boy named Temujin was born near the Onon River. His father, Yesugei, was a tribal leader, but when Temujin was still a child, Yesugei was poisoned by enemies. With his father gone, Temujin's family was abandoned by their clan. His mother, Huelun, struggled to feed her children, gathering roots and berries. The family endured hunger, cold, and danger. Temujin grew up with hardship pressing on every side, yet he also grew strong. He learned that loyalty could not be taken for granted, and that leadership meant more than noble blood. It meant fairness, courage, and trust. Even as a boy, he made alliances with other children, who would later become his generals. He married a young woman named Berthe, whose support and wisdom guided him throughout his life. The boy who once had nothing would rise to command millions. Temujin began uniting the feuding Mongol tribes one by one. Sometimes he fought, sometimes he negotiated, sometimes he offered friendship and marriage ties. He built loyalty by rewarding skill and merit rather than noble birth. A blacksmith's son could rise to be a general if he proved his worth. This fairness attracted followers who were tired of clan feuds. By 1206, at a great council called Kurultai, Temujin was declared Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. The Mongols, once scattered, were now one, and under their Khan, they would set out to change the world. The secret of the Mongols' success lay in their army. Every warrior was a skilled rider and archer. The Mongol bow, made of wood, horn, and sinew, could fire arrows farther than most armies could reach. Warriors carried several horses, switching between them to stay fresh. Discipline was strict. If one man fled, his whole unit might be punished. If they fought bravely, all were rewarded. Orders were given by drums, flags, and torches echoing across the battlefield. The army could travel faster than anyone imagined, up to 100 kilometers in a day. Enemies often did not even know the Mongols were near until arrows rained from the sky. Genghis Khan also created a code of law called the Yasa. It demanded loyalty, punished theft, and protected messengers and trade. Religious tolerance was enforced. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and others could all worship freely under Mongol rule. The Yasa gave order to a growing empire that might otherwise have fallen apart. The Mongols first turned toward China. Great walled cities resisted, but the Mongols learned siegecraft, building towers and catapults. One by one, the northern kingdoms fell. Then came the Khwarezmian Empire in Persia and Central Asia. When a Mongol trade caravan was killed, Genghis Khan sent envoys, but they were executed. Furious, he unleashed his armies. Cities that resisted were destroyed. Cities that surrendered were spared. Word spread, to resist the Mongols was death, but to submit could bring safety. The empire grew like a storm rolling across continents. The Mongols were conquerors, but they were also builders of connections. They created a network of relay stations called the Yam, where riders could switch horses and deliver messages across thousands of miles. Trade flourished along the Silk Road. Silk, spices, jewels, and glass moved from one end of Eurasia to the other. Merchants were protected, and bandits feared Mongol patrols. In markets, you might find Chinese porcelain, Persian carpets, Russian furs, and Indian spices side by side. The Mongols also encouraged scholars, doctors, and artisans to travel and share their knowledge. Ideas flowed as freely as goods. In China, Mongol rulers blended their customs with Chinese traditions, eventually founding the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson. In Persia, Mongol rulers built palaces, mosques, and observatories. Artists painted miniature manuscripts, mixing Persian elegance with Mongol themes. On the steppe, many nomads still lived as before, moving with their herds, but now under the banner of a vast empire. Religious tolerance meant that in one city you might see mosques, churches, and temples standing side by side. After Genghis Khan died in 1227, his empire was divided among his sons, but expansion continued. Ögedei Khan led campaigns into Eastern Europe, reaching Hungary and Poland. Batu Khan established the Golden Horde, ruling Russia for centuries. Hulagu Khan conquered Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate. Kublai Khan defeated the Song dynasty in China and founded the Yuan dynasty, ruling from Beijing. Under Kublai, the empire reached its greatest glory. Even European travelers like Marco Polo came to his court and marveled at its wealth and order. The Mongols connected civilizations that had once been far apart. Gunpowder traveled from China to the Middle East and Europe. Paper money spread across continents. Maps improved as merchants and scholars shared knowledge. European envoys met Mongol rulers, hoping to form alliances. Muslim scholars debated with Buddhist monks in Mongol courts. Though the Mongols were feared, they also created a bridge across the world. But empires rise and fall. By the late 1200s, the Mongol Empire was too large to govern as one. Rivalries between heirs divided it into four main khanates: the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Yuan dynasty in China. As unity faded, enemies grew stronger. The Black Death swept along trade routes, devastating populations. By the 14th century, the Mongol Empire was crumbling. By the 15th, it was gone. Yet their legacy endured. The Silk Road reached its greatest heights under their rule. Knowledge, inventions, and art traveled further than ever before. The Mongols showed how a small nation could, through unity and vision, shape the world. Even today, their memory lingers in the cultures of Asia, the architecture of Persia, and the stories told across the steppes. And now, As you drift to sleep, imagine the steppe at night. The stars stretched endlessly across the sky. A campfire flickers. Horses breathe softly, their silhouettes dark against the grass. The Mongol Empire rose like a storm, swept across the earth, and then faded into history. But the wind of the steppe still carries the echoes of hooves and the memory of a people who once ruled the largest empire the world had ever seen. So rest now, with those echoes fading into the distance. The story is finished, and dreams await. Good night. Tonight, let us journey through time to one of the most remarkable civilizations in history, the Ottoman Empire. This is not a story of kings and wars alone, but of cities and families, markets and music, palaces and prayers. It is a story that stretched across 6 centuries and 3 continents. Yet, like every story, it began small, with a dream. Close your eyes and imagine the rolling hills of Anatolia in the late 1200s. The land is a crossroads. To the east, the remnants of the old Seljuk Turks. To the west, the crumbling Byzantine Empire. Here, small groups of warriors, called Ghazis, roam on horseback, living simply, fighting when needed, and protecting their people. Among them is a leader named Osman, son of Ertugrul. Osman is remembered not just as a fighter, but as a man of vision. Around him gather farmers, traders, and families who believe his tribe can build something greater. They take his name, calling themselves the Ottomans. The story of Osman's dream is told like a legend. One night he dreams of a great tree growing from his chest, spreading its branches across the world, sheltering people of many lands. When he wakes, he takes it as a sign that his dynasty is destined to endure. And so, from a small frontier state, the Ottoman Empire is born. For over 100 years, the Ottomans grow. They take villages, towns, and cities. They welcome craftsmen and scholars, building mosques and markets, yet always their eyes turn to one city, Constantinople. For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople has stood, guarded by colossal walls. It is the capital of the Byzantine Empire, sitting on the Bosphorus Strait, a bridge between Europe and Asia. Whoever holds it controls trade, armies, and influence. In 1451, a young man becomes Sultan, Mehmed II, only 19 years old, but he is determined. He dreams of taking Constantinople where others had failed. Imagine the scene in 1453. The Ottomans build giant cannons so large they must be pulled by teams of oxen. Ships are rolled across land on greased logs to bypass chains across the harbor. Drums beat, voices chant, the ground shakes. For 53 days, the city resists. But on May 29th, the walls finally fall. Mehmed rides through the gates. He prays in the great church of Hagia Sophia, now a mosque. Constantinople becomes Istanbul, the new capital of the Ottomans. The empire now has a beating heart. Picture Istanbul in its golden age. Narrow streets twist between wooden houses. Markets overflow with carpets, spices, and silk. The call to prayer drifts from tall minarets. In the Grand Bazaar, one of the oldest covered markets in the world, Merchants shout their wares, shimmering cloth from Persia, perfume from Arabia, silver from the Balkans. The air smells of roasted coffee and honeyed pastries. Children run between stalls, laughing. Storytellers gather small crowds, reciting tales of heroes and wanderers. Life is not the same for everyone. Wealthy families live in large homes, decorated with tiles and cushions. Farmers in Anatolia work the land, bringing wheat and olives to market. In villages, people gather at bathhouses where steam rises and voices echo in tiled chambers. But whether rich or poor, life is woven together by tradition, faith, and community. At the center of it all is the Sultan. He rules from the Topkapi Palace, a sprawling residence overlooking the Bosphorus. Walk with me through its gardens. Fountains sparkle in the sunlight. Roses and tulips bloom in every color. Courtyards open into halls covered in blue Isnik tiles. Inside live not just the Sultan, but his family, advisors, guards, and servants. The harem, often misunderstood, is not only a private space, but a world of learning, politics, and influence where mothers, wives, and daughters shaped the future of the empire. Some sultans were fierce warriors, others poets and dreamers. One of the most famous, Suleiman the Magnificent, ruled in the 1500s. Under him, the empire stretched further than ever, from Hungary in Europe, across the Middle East, and into North Africa. He built mosques, schools, and laws that gave order to a vast, diverse land. The Ottomans were known for their janissaries, elite soldiers trained from childhood. They marched in perfect lines, drums and flutes setting the pace. They carried muskets, bows, and curved swords called yatagans. But the empire was not just about soldiers, it was also about scholars, poets, and builders. In Istanbul, the architect Sinan designed mosques so graceful that their domes seemed to float on air. Music filled the courts, flutes, lutes, and drums weaving rhythms that still echo today. Close your eyes and let us sail with the Ottomans. Their ships crossed the Mediterranean, reaching the deserts of Egypt and the shores of Tunisia. Caravans traveled through Syria, carrying silk and spices. In the Balkans, stone bridges cross rushing rivers, linking markets and villages. For centuries, the empire is the meeting place of worlds, East and West, old and new. But no empire lasts forever. By the 1700s, the Ottomans face new challenges. Europe is changing. New machines, new armies, new ideas. The empire struggles to keep pace. Wars are lost. Territories break away. The empire that once stretched so wide begins to shrink. Some call it the sick man of Europe. In the 1800s, sultans tried to reform, building schools, factories, and railways. But revolts rise, and foreign powers interfere. Finally, after the First World War, the Ottoman Empire breathes its last breath. In 1922, it is replaced by the modern Republic of Turkey, led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Though the empire ended, its memory lives on. Mosques still rise in Istanbul, their domes gleaming at sunset. The Grand Bazaar still buzzes with voices and color. Ottoman food, music, and stories still warm hearts from the Balkans to the Middle East. The empire left behind not just buildings and borders, but a sense of connection between continents, cultures, and centuries. And now, as night falls, imagine the Bosphorus waters shimmering under the moon. The domes and minarets of Istanbul glow softly in silver light. The sounds of the city fade into whispers. The story of the Ottoman Empire is not just a tale of power and decline, it is the story of people, farmers, merchants, poets, mothers, children, who lived, dreamed, and built a world that shaped history. As you close your eyes and drift into sleep, carry with you the image of a city between worlds, a place where East meet West, and where the echoes of the past still whisper in the night air. Good night. Long ago, high in the mighty Andes Mountains of South America, there was a land where the peaks touched the clouds, where rivers curled like silver snakes, and where the sun seemed closer than anywhere else on earth. This land would one day become home to the great Inca Empire, an empire so vast and so clever that it stretched along the spine of a continent. But tonight, we're not rushing through battles or conquests. Tonight, we walk slowly, step by step, through their history. We will listen as the mountains whisper, as the rivers hum, and as the old stones speak of the people who built wonders, still standing after hundreds of years. So close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let us journey back. Every great people begin with a story. For the Inca, it was a story of the sun. Long ago, the god of the sun, Inti, looked down from the heavens and saw the people on earth living in confusion, without order, without leaders. Inti felt pity for them, so he sent his children, a brother and sister named Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, to bring wisdom. They carried with them a golden staff. The sun god told them, "Wherever this staff sinks easily into the earth, there you must build a city, and from there you will guide my people." So Manco Capac and Mama Oclo wandered through valleys and across hills. The staff struck hard rocks, bounced off frozen earth, and refused to sink. But then, in a green valley, surrounded by mountains, the golden staff slid into the soil and stayed. "This," they said, "will be the heart of our people." And there they founded Cusco, the navel of the world. Whether you believe the story or not doesn't matter tonight. What matters is that Cusco grew from this legend, and from Cusco grew the empire. Cusco began as a small village of stone houses and thatched roofs, but it was placed in a valley like a bowl cradled by the Andes. Rivers gave it water. Terraces carved into the hills gave it food. The early Incas worked hard. They planted potatoes, maize, and quinoa. They raised llamas and alpacas for wool and meat, and slowly their village became a town, and the town became a city. The rulers of Cusco claimed descent from the sun god. That gave them power, but also responsibility. They believed they had to make the land bloom and the people prosper. And so the Incas built temples, most famously the Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun. Its walls were covered in sheets of shining gold, so bright that when the sun rose, the temple glowed like dawn itself. Inside, statues of llamas and corn were also made of pure gold, offered to Inti. At night, people would look at the temple and believe the sun was still with them, even when it had gone to the other side of the earth. The Incas had no iron, no wheels, and no horses, and yet they became some of the greatest builders in human history. Why? Because they listened to the mountains. When the slopes were too steep to farm, they cut them into terraces, giant steps climbing the hills. These terraces held soil in place, kept water flowing evenly, and made the mountains bloom with green. From above, they looked like stairways to the sky. To bring water, they built aqueducts and canals, carrying streams across valleys and into fields. Some of these still work today, carrying water after centuries. And their stones. Oh, their stones. The Incas cut and shaped giant blocks with such precision that they fit together without mortar, like puzzle pieces. You could not slip even a knife blade between them. That is why, even when earthquakes shook the Andes, Inca walls stood strong while newer buildings crumbled. Imagine walking through Cusco then. Narrow streets lined with polished stones, each one carved to hug the next, each one whispering, "We will last." As Cusco grew, so did the ambitions of its rulers. They began to send armies and emissaries out into neighboring valleys. Sometimes they fought, sometimes they made alliances, sometimes they offered gifts. One by one, kingdoms and tribes were brought under Inca rule. Some resisted fiercely, others joined willingly, seeing the benefits of shared food, safety, and roads. Ah yes, the roads. The Inca Empire stretched over 2,500 miles, longer than the entire Roman Empire. And to hold it together, the Incas built an astonishing network of roads, bridges, and paths. There were stone highways that cut across deserts, suspension bridges woven from grass that swung above roaring rivers, steep stairways that climbed sheer cliffs. Altogether, these paths stretched for over 25,000 miles. Along these roads ran the chasquis, young swift messengers. They carried messages knotted into quipus, colorful strings tied with special knots that held numbers and information. The chasquis passed messages from one to the next, so that news could travel faster than a bird across the empire. If the Sapa Inca, the emperor, in Cusco wanted fresh fish from the coast, it could be carried to him within 2 days. Imagine, fish from the ocean served in the mountains, still fresh thanks to roads and runners. Now, let's pause. Empires are not only about kings and roads. They are also about everyday life. Most Inca people were farmers. They rose with the sun, worked in the fields, and gave part of their harvest to the state. In return, the state gave them security and food during hard times. People wore simple clothes made of alpaca wool, dyed in bright reds, yellows, and blues. Nobles wore fine tunics, and the Sapa Inca himself dressed in garments so sacred that once he wore them, no one else could. They were burned to honor him. Food was simple but nourishing. Potatoes were a gift of the Andes. Maize was prized and used to make chicha, a kind of corn drink for festivals. People also dried potatoes into chuño, which could last for years, perfect for times of hunger. Festivals filled the year with music, dancing, and offerings to the gods. People believed the mountains, the rivers, the stars, all were alive, all were watching. To live was to give thanks. Far above the Urubamba River, hidden among the clouds, the Incas built one of their most breathtaking creations, Machu Picchu. We do not know exactly why it was built. Some say it was a royal retreat, others a religious sanctuary, others a fortress. But what we do know is this: it is a city that seems to grow out of the mountain itself. Terraces step down its slopes, temples rise from its heart. The Temple of the Sun curves to match the rocks around it. Stone windows frame the sunrise on special days of the year, marking solstices. And the stones, again, those perfect stones, some weigh many tons, yet were moved and set without wheels or steel. For centuries Machu Picchu lay hidden from the outside world, wrapped in mist, guarded by jungle. Only in 1911 did outsiders rediscover it, though local farmers had always known of it. Today it stands as a jewel of Inca genius, whispering secrets to anyone who walks its quiet paths. At the heart of the empire was the Sapa Inca, the emperor. He was seen as the child of the sun, a living god. He wore a headdress of golden feathers. He sat on a golden throne. Wherever he went, people bowed low, for to look into his eyes without permission was forbidden. But the Inca ruler was not only a figure of awe. He had enormous responsibilities. He decided when armies marched, when fields were planted, when roads were built. His word was a law across mountains, deserts, and jungles. Below him were nobles, priests, and generals, then administrators and record keepers who used quipus to count crops and people. And below them, the farmers, craftsmen, and laborers, the true backbone of the empire. It was a pyramid of power, but all connected, like the terraces on a hillside, each supporting the other. For hundreds of years, the Inca Empire grew and thrived. By the early 1500s, it stretched from modern-day Colombia down to Chile, across Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Argentina. Millions of people lived within its borders. But far away, across an ocean, changes were stirring. Spain had discovered the Americas, and conquistadors were arriving with steel guns and horses. In 1532, a band of Spaniards led by Francisco Pizarro entered Inca lands. They were few in numbers, less than 200 men, but they carried weapons the Incas had never seen before. They also brought diseases like smallpox, which had already weakened the empire before the Spaniards even arrived. Worse still, the Incas were divided. Two brothers, Atahualpa and Huáscar, had fought a brutal civil war for the throne. The people were exhausted, the empire fragile. At Cajamarca, the Spaniards met Atahualpa. Though the Inca had thousands of warriors, he was captured in a daring ambush. The Spaniards demanded a ransom of gold and silver, more wealth than the world had ever seen in one room. The Incas filled it, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. But after receiving it, the Spaniards killed Atahualpa anyway. It was the beginning of the end. The fall of the Inca Empire was not sudden. For years, resistance flickered in valleys and mountains. Brave leaders like Manco Inca fought on, retreating to remote fortresses like Vilcabamba. But little by little, Spanish rule spread. The temples were stripped of gold. The quipus were cut and forgotten. The roads carried new masters. And yet the spirit of the Inca never vanished. The terraces still grow crops. The aqueducts still carry water. The stones of Cusco still stand. And the people, the descendants of the Incas, still live in Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, and beyond, speaking Quechua, carrying traditions, singing songs that echo through the Andes. The empire fell, yes, but the memory lives. Today, travelers from across the world climb to Machu Picchu and feel awe. Historians study the quipus, trying to untie their secrets. Farmers still plant potatoes on terraces first carved by Inca hands. And when the sun rises over Cusco, golden light still touches the stones, as if Inti himself never left. The Inca story teaches us about resilience, creativity, and respect for the land. It reminds us that people with no wheels, no steel, no horses could build wonders that outlast empires. It is a story of beginnings and endings, of myths and mountains, of roads without end, and terraces without limit. Now, as you lie in your bed, imagine the Andes at night. The stars are sharp above, the rivers murmur below, and somewhere, perhaps the stones of Machu Picchu glow faintly in the moonlight. Breathe slowly, as the Incas did in their valleys. Feel the rhythm of terraces, step by step, rising to the sky. Hear the echo of chasqui footsteps fading into the distance. The empire has passed into history, but its spirit rests in the mountains, cradling you as you drift to sleep. Rest well, traveler of time, for the Incas and the Andes are watching over you. Tonight, we're floating to a faraway place where the moon paints silver paths on water, where palm trees whisper to the night, and cats guard doorways with bright, curious eyes. We're going to ancient Egypt, where the Nile River flows like a silky ribbon through golden deserts, bringing life wherever it moves. Now, take a deep breath in and out. Feel your pillow like a warm sandbank beside a quiet river. Close your eyes and imagine you're in a small reed boat. The boat is gentle and steady, like a cradle. The sides are woven from papyrus reeds, tied carefully by patient hands. The water swishes in soft, sleepy patterns. A warm breeze brushes your cheeks. You smell sweet date palms and the clean scent of wet river plants. Far away, frogs sing, and crickets play tiny violins. Somewhere on the bank, a cow lowing to her calf answers the night. The stars above are bright and friendly. One of them twinkles as if it's winking just at you. On the left bank, a quiet village glows with golden lanterns. Houses are made from sun-baked mud bricks, smooth and cool to the touch. Doorways are shaded with woven mats, and gently sleeping cats curl beside baskets of grain. In one house, a child your age lies on a bed stuffed with soft reeds, just like you. A mother hums as she smooths a linen sheet. Linen is cool and light, made from flax plants grown in the rich dark soil after the river's flood. She hums a tune the Nile has known for thousands of nights, and her song floats out into the warm air and comes to rest on the edge of your little boat. Your boat drifts closer to the shore, and you step onto the soft earth. A path leads through waving grasses to the village. Fireflies blink like tiny lamps, guiding your feet. The village smells like warm bread and honey. A baker has taken loaves from a clay oven shaped like a beehive. He taps a crust, and the sound is snug and homelike. "Welcome," whispers the baker, smiling. "We saved a heel of bread for the traveler." He breaks a small piece and places it in your hand. It tastes of sunlight and something sweet, maybe dates. A thin stripe of sesame makes it nutty and toasty. You nibble, and the bread helps your eyes feel heavy and happy. Across the square, a scribe sits at a low table with a smooth wooden board. He dips a reed pen into a tiny pot of ink and writes careful lines on papyrus. Papyrus is made from the same reeds as your boat, sliced, pressed, and dried until it becomes a pale sheet that whispers when you turn it. The scribe's hand moves in gentle strokes. A bird, a ripple, an eye, a swirl, symbols that are both picture and sound. He looks up and nods politely. "Each mark is a word," he says softly. "Each word is a small boat carrying an idea." He sets down his pen. "Would you like to see a story float?" He blows lightly on the ink, and the symbols shine. You nod, and the scribe smiles. "Come back tomorrow," he whispers. "Tonight is for dreams." A cat slips from the shadows, coat striped like river reeds. She winds around your legs and purrs. A tiny drum that hums. "Her name is Mio," says an old woman weaving a basket. "Let her walk with you to the river. Cats are guardians of calm." The cat skims ahead, tail high like a royal flag, and you follow her down to the moonlit bank. Your reed boat waits, whispering against the shore. You step in with the cat, and the boat drifts onward. Night is deep and soft. The moon is a silvery coin. You pass fields that will soon be green with barley and flax. Fields that listen for the river's flood each year. When the Nile rises, it leaves a blanket of rich black earth called silt. It's the gift that keeps everyone fed. People, goats, even the birds who tiptoe through the puddles. Now, farther along the bank, something tall stands against the sky. At first it looks like a mountain, but as you draw near, you see crisp edges and straight lines. It is a pyramid, ancient and steady, resting on the earth like a giant's quiet thought. Its stones glow in the moonlight. At the base, a calm statue watches, the body of a lion, the head of a person, dreaming, guarding, remembering. Your boat stops near a stairway of stone. The cat hops out lightly, and so do you. Your bare feet feel the coolness of night-kissed rock. The pyramid doesn't speak with words, but you feel it telling a story, a long, long story about time and patience, and hands that build carefully, stone after stone, like placing beads on a string. The wind moves and seems to say, "We were made to point to the sky, to the stars that guide farmers and sailors, to the patterns that tell when the flood will come." You sit on a step beside a lantern. A gentle man in linen, with a simple staff, sits too. He is a temple caretaker with thoughtful eyes and the smile of someone who listens a lot. He looks at the pyramid and then at you. "Do you know the story of the sun?" he asks in a whisper. You shake your head just a little. "In the morning," he says, "the sun god rises his golden boat across the sky, lighting the fields so flax can grow tall and the baker can see his bread turning brown. At night he sails through the underworld, where he rests and wrestles with shadows so he can rise again strong. We look up to the stars to know his paths. He points. There's the river of the sky, and there a bright star that tells us when to plant. The sky is a calendar, and the calendar is a comfort. With it, no matter what happens, we know the seasons will return. You gaze upward. The stars are countless, like a sprinkle of salt on blue silk. For a tiny moment, you feel you could float among them. The caretaker's voice continues, slow and soothing. We tell stories so children won't fear the night. We tell stories so grown-ups remember to be kind in the day. We tell stories so time feels like a friend. He rises and touches the stone. Rest well, he says. The pyramid will watch with me. You nod. Your boat tugs at its rope as if eager to keep going, and you drift away with a purring cat beside you. The river widens. On one side, a small cluster of boats is moored together. You hear soft music, harps, pipes, a drum like a heartbeat. A family is celebrating a good harvest. Children dip their hands into bowls of honey and laugh quietly when it sticks to their fingers. A grandmother tells a riddle about a crocodile who wanted to learn to dance. The answer makes everyone smile. You wave and they wave back. Travel safely, calls a voice like wind in tall grass. Your boat glides through a veil of silver moonlight and into a stretch of river where lotus flowers open their pale faces to the night. One blossoms right beside your hand. Its petals are smooth and cool, and it smells faintly sweet like a promise. Now the river grows very still, as if holding its breath for a special secret. The cat lifts her head and looks toward the far bank. You follow her gaze and see a temple painted with soft colors. Columns carved with leaves stand in rows like a stone forest. Lamps flicker in the doorways. A priestess in white linen stands at the top of the steps, holding a small oil lamp that barely moves in the breeze. "Welcome, traveler," she says gently. "Would you like to hear a story of kindness?" You tie your boat and climb the steps. Her voice is calm and warm. "Once," she begins, "the land forgot to be gentle. Storms shouted, and people hurried and bumped into one another. So the Lady of Magic and Care, some call her the Mother with clever hands, walked along the river. Wherever she placed a hand, grain grew. Wherever she set down a jar, water became sweet. She told the people, 'Share your bread, and your days will feel full.' And so they did. The storms grew quieter, and the land remembered how to be kind." The priestess smiles. "Kindness is a spell anyone can cast. It needs only two ingredients, a willing heart and the smallest brave action. She gives you a tiny clay amulet shaped like a lotus bud. For peaceful dreams, she says. You tuck it into a little pocket near your heart. Down the steps again, into your soft boat, and the priestess lifts her lamp in a silent blessing as you drift away. The night air carries you onward. You pass fishermen who sleep on their boats with nets folded like blankets, and you pass a farmer's field where a water wheel creaks slowly, lifting river to channel, channel to field, so plants can sip while a farmer rests. A heron lifts into the air, legs trailing like two reeds, wings beating in unhurried strokes. Somewhere far off, a crocodile slides into the water with hardly a ripple, so smooth you feel more amazed than afraid. The cat watches and then curls back into a circle of sleep, trusting the river. Dawn begins as a thought of color behind the desert hills. Dusty, rose, then tangerine, then a clean, bright gold. The first birds are already busy, calling to one another. I am here, are you there? I am here. The air smells new. The river blushes pink as if it, too, is waking. You touch the water with your fingertips and whisper a tiny thank you to the Nile for carrying boats and ideas and stories and seeds and families from one day to the next. As the sky grows lighter, your boat finds a gentle curve in the river where palm trees lean in like friends sharing secrets. A small market is waking up. Traders unroll mats and set out their treasures. Strings of blue-green beads, baskets of figs, jars of perfumed oil, and swatches of linen that shine like soft water. You tie your boat and wander among the stalls. Smell this, says a kind man, lifting the lid from a jar. The scent of frankincense rises, sweet, woody, clean, and seems to make your thoughts smooth and slow. For calm, he says. It helps busy minds remember how to rest. You smile. And this, says a woman selling baskets. She hands you a tiny woven charm shaped like a fish. For good luck and safe travels. You thank her, and she laughs softly. The river already likes you, she says, but a little luck is a friendly thing. Across the way, a storyteller sits on a low stool. Children gather at his feet, and you sit among them. He lifts his hands and begins. Here is the story of how the calendar learned to count, he says. His voice is gentle and round. He tells of great beings who argued and hugged and traded days and nights until the year fit just right, with seasons that knew when to arrive. He tells it simply, and you can feel the puzzle pieces click into place. And so, he ends, the people knew when to plant and harvest, when to build and when to rest, when to tell stories and when to listen to dreams. The children clap softly, more a patter than a thunder. One more, they ask. The storyteller smiles, just one tiny more. Welcome. Take a deep breath, let your shoulders loosen, and let this story guide you gently into rest. Long ago, under the quiet stars of Italy, there was a land of rivers, hills, and forests. On warm evenings, the Tiber River flowed slowly, carrying moonlight upon its back. Olive trees whispered in the breeze, and shepherds lit small fires that flickered against the night. It was in this land, peaceful yet filled with destiny, that the stories of Rome began. Legends passed from mouth to mouth, growing like vines, telling of courage, honor, and gods who walked beside mortals. And so, tonight, as you close your eyes, you may imagine yourself wandering those ancient paths. The world is calm, the stars steady above you, and Rome is just beginning. The tale begins with twin brothers Romulus and Remus, abandoned as infants, left in a basket to drift upon the waters of the Tiber. The river carried them gently, as if cradling them in its arms. At last, they came to rest beneath the shade of a fig tree. There a she-wolf appeared. Her fur was dark, her eyes steady, and instead of harm, she gave them care. She fed them, kept them warm, and watched over them until a shepherd found them. The shepherd raised the twins as his own, teaching them to walk the hills, to hunt, and to honor the gods. Years passed, and the brothers grew tall and strong. They dreamed of building a city of their own, a place that would rise upon the seven hills. But as often happens in great stories, pride and anger came between them. In a quarrel, Romulus lifted his hand against Remus, and Remus fell. Sorrow mixed with destiny, and Romulus built his city, naming it Rome, after himself. From that moment, Rome stood upon foundations of both triumph and tragedy. And yet the city grew, as if guided by unseen hands. After Romulus, kings ruled the young city. Some fierce, some ambitious, some cruel, but among them was Numa Pompilius, a man of peace. Numa loved the quiet more than war. He taught the Romans to till their fields, to honor the gods with temples and rituals. He set the calendar by the movements of the moon, teaching people to mark time not only by battles, but by seasons and harvests. Under his rule, Rome rested. Fires burned calmly in the hearths, and the people grew strong in spirit. They say Numa was guided by a nymph, the spirit Egeria, who whispered wisdom to him in the sacred groves. By her counsel he shaped laws that endured, simple and fair, binding the people together. And though many kings came after him, some fierce, some wild, the memory of Numa remained, a reminder that even in Rome, the sword was not all, and peace could be a crown greater than gold. Yet the roots of Rome stretch further back, across the sea, into the ashes of Troy. When that city burned, a hero named Aeneas fled, carrying his aged father on his shoulders and holding his young son's hand. He wandered upon the waves, facing storms, tempests, and loss. In Carthage, he found love with Queen Dido, yet fate pulled him away. He wept, but destiny does not bend. The gods whispered, Italy awaits. At last, Aeneas reached the land of Latium, where rivers met the sea. There he fought and forged alliances, planting seeds of a people who would one day call themselves Romans. His story was one of endurance, of duty above desire, and in Roman memory, Aeneas became the forefather of them all. In every tale the gods watched. Jupiter, king of the heavens, holding thunderbolts in his hand, yet calm in his judgment. Juno, watchful queen, stern but protective of hearth and marriage. Venus, soft and radiant, who smiled upon love and beauty. Mars, fierce, restless, whose steps echoed in the clashing of swords. To the Romans, these gods were never far. Their temples rose on hillsides, their fires burned in the forum, their names whispered in prayers before battle and harvest alike. And yet, beyond power, they were guardians, symbols of order, of nature's rhythm, of the eternal bond between mortals and the divine. Rome's legends were not only of kings and gods, but of men and women who lived with honor. There was Lucretia, whose dignity and sacrifice stirred the Romans to cast out their kings and swear to never again be ruled by tyranny. Her name lived on as a symbol of purity and courage. There was Horatius at the bridge, who faced an army alone. He stood while the Romans broke the bridge behind him, holding back foes with shield and sword until the city was safe. Then, leaping into the river, he swam to shore, carrying Rome's survival upon his shoulders. And there was Cincinnatus, a farmer who left his plough when Rome called him. He led the army to victory. Then, when power was his to keep, he gave it back, returning to his farm. A man who chose the quiet of fields over the weight of crowns. And so the legends weave together of twins raised by a wolf, of kings both fierce and gentle, of heroes who carried the past into the future. Rome rose not in a day, nor in a single tale, but in countless voices bound by honor, courage, and destiny. Tonight, as you rest, imagine the glow of firelight upon stone walls. Hear the murmur of the Tiber as it flows beneath the stars. Picture temples rising, arches standing, stories unfolding, and know that Rome, like a dream, endures. Breathe slowly. Let the stories drift around you like soft music. Let your body sink deeper into rest. The voices of Rome grow quiet, fading into the night, and soon you too will sleep. After the time of the kings, Rome entered a new age. It was called the Republic. It was a time when no single king ruled the people, but instead men chosen from among themselves to guide the city, to keep its laws, and to lead its armies when danger came. The Romans believed in balance: two consuls, not one king. The Senate, a council of elders to advise and restrain. And the people, who gathered in assemblies to speak their will. It was not always peaceful, but Rome endured. The Romans admired courage, discipline, and loyalty to the city above oneself. They told stories of men like Cincinnatus, a farmer who was asked to lead Rome in war. He did so with strength and speed, and when victory was won, he returned to his plough, refusing power for himself. This was the Roman way. But Rome was never still. From a small city, it reached across hills, valleys, and seas, first in Italy, then across the Mediterranean. Carthage, in the west, became Rome's great rival. The Punic Wars are whispered in history, and the name of Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who led elephants across the Alps, still stirs the imagination. But even Hannibal, brave as he was, could not defeat Rome forever. In the end, the eternal city endured. As Rome grew rich, its republic began to strain. The Senate argued, generals gained power, the people were divided, and in this storm came a name: Julius Caesar. Bold, brilliant, and ambitious, he crossed the river Rubicon with his army, and the republic trembled. The old system could not hold. The age of kings was gone. The age of emperors was about to begin. After Caesar's fall, his heir Octavian, later called Augustus, became Rome's first emperor. Under Augustus, peace returned. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, lasted for centuries. Roads stretched across the land, aqueducts carried water to the cities, amphitheaters filled with crowds. Amphitheaters filled with crowds. Temples rose to the gods. Rome became the heart of the world. Some emperors ruled with wisdom. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher, who wrote of calmness, patience, and duty. Others ruled with fire and cruelty. Nero, remembered for his extravagance and for a city that burned. Yet through it all, Rome endured, century after century, stone upon stone, law upon law, story upon story. But all things change. As the years passed, Rome grew too vast, too heavy to carry. Enemies pressed at the borders, armies divided, and the empire split in two, east and west. And though the Western Empire would fall, its spirit lived on. In the East, in Constantinople, in the laws and languages of Europe, in the stories we whisper tonight. So as you rest, remember the path of Rome, from a small village by the Tiber to the mighty republic, to the empire that touched the world. Its people are gone, its stones are ruins, but its memory remains, a reminder of courage, of ambition, of triumph and of fall. Now let the memory of Rome fade, like a sunset beyond the hills. Let your breathing slow, let your eyes grow heavy, and drift into sleep, for the story is finished, and the night is yours. Welcome. Find a comfortable place to rest. Let your shoulders lower, your jaw soften, and your breath arrive without effort, in and out. Tonight we travel to ancient Greece, to starlit coasts, marble temples, and quiet mountain paths where stories live forever. I will guide you through the beginning of the world, the rise of the Olympian gods, the whispered lessons of famous myths, and the gentle peace that waits at the end of every tale. Let the night hold you, let the stories carry you. Before time felt like time, there was chaos, not noise or confusion, but a wide open space, a quiet, endless breath. Out of that stillness came Gaia, the earth, steady and generous, green and warm. She rose like a soft horizon, offering a place to stand, to rest, to be. Then Uranus, the sky, unfurled above her, deep blue by day, velvet by night, jeweled with stars. Earth and sky, a gentle pair, the lower and the upper, the bed and the blanket. From their union came the Titans, great and old as mountain bones. They were patient as stones and vast as rivers. Among them Oceanus, who circled the world, Hyperion, who bore the light, Theia and Tethys, Rhea and Themis, names that move like waves across a beach. Time in those first days did not hurry. It drifted like clouds across the open sky. The earth learned the rhythm of oceans. The sky learned the rhythm of stars. But even in a peaceful world, change quietly waits. One Titan, Cronus, listened for it. He heard the faint future in the wind, a whisper that the young would rise,
Cronus feared the prophecy that a child would one day surpass him. Fear can close even the widest hands. One by one, as his children were born, he kept them from the light. But Rhea, the mother, carried a hope as steady as the sea. When her youngest, Zeus, arrived, Rhea hid him in a cave on Crete, a secret place where the air was cool and the stone walls held every whisper close. Nymphs cared for the child. Bees left tiny drops of honey on the rock like golden dew. Outside, the guardians beat their bronze shields, a soft thunder to mask the newborn's cry. In that quiet cave, Zeus grew, breath by breath, day by day, until his courage matched the breadth of the sky itself. One day, guided by patience and love, Zeus returned to set things right. He opened the way for his hidden siblings, Hera, Demeter, Hestia, Poseidon, Hades, to see the light. Together they stood, the young against the old, not with hurry, but with a steady will that change often brings. The earth did not break, the sky did not fall, but something shifted, and from that shift a new harmony came. With the Titans retired to distant myth, the children of Rhea took their places. Atop Mount Olympus, white with clouds and quiet with height, the gods began their watch. Zeus, keeper of the wide sky, held thunder like a reminder rather than a threat. Lightning to him was simply a bright thought passing. Hera, queenly and careful, tended loyalty and the bonds that hold hearts together. Poseidon leaned his ear to the seas. He knew every current by name, every tide by feeling. Hades, thoughtful and solemn, kept the underworld not as a cruelty, but as a library of memory, where every life is recorded and gently placed. Demeter leaned close to the fields. Wheat rose to meet her hand. Hestia tended the central fire, the small light that makes a house a home. Athena wore wisdom like a clear morning. Apollo carried sunlight and song. Artemis walked soft in forests silvered by the moon. Aphrodite smiled where hearts were brave. Hermes walked swiftly, delivering messages between worlds. From Olympus they watched the mortal world like gardeners watch a slow, beautiful garden, not to control it, but to know when to water, when to wait, and when simply to admire. Sometimes they feasted, sometimes they argued, the way bright minds do. But always the great mountain stood calm beneath them, and the world below continued to breathe. In the early days, the nights were longer, and mortals felt the chill. Prometheus, a friend to humankind, watched them shiver and fumble in darkness. He felt a kindness rise in him like a small flame cupped in two hands. He brought fire to the people, warmth for their homes, light for their evenings, a spark for their ideas. With fire, food tasted fuller. With fire, stories lasted longer. With fire, night felt less lonely. The gift came with consequence. The sky does not ignore a sudden glow, but beyond the tensions between gods and givers, the fire remained. You can still hear it in the soft crackle of earth, the way it settles a room. Prometheus' kindness lives wherever a small light promises comfort. Another gift came in a different shape. Pandora, the first woman, curious as spring rain. She received a jar, some say a box, sealed against the unknown. It sat in her home like a question you cannot stop thinking about. When she opened it, the world breathed out a wind of worries, sickness, sorrow, misunderstandings that tangle like old nets. They swirled and scattered. People learned, sometimes painfully, how tender life can be. But at the bottom, quiet and patient, something remained: hope. Small but warm, gentle but brave. It does not shout, it does not insist. Hope simply stays, like a hand waiting for yours in the dark. There was once a musician named Orpheus, whose songs could soften stone and tame the wind. He loved Eurydice, and she loved him, as simply as two notes that belong together. When she died, a quiet fell that even birds refused to break. Orpheus went below, into Hades' realm, carrying only his instrument and a courage lit by love. He sang for the underworld, low, slow, and tender. The shadows listened, the rivers hushed. Even Hades' solemn heart leaned closer. The rulers agreed. Orpheus could lead Eurydice back, if he trusted enough to not look back until they reached the light. Trust can be heavier than stone. Steps can feel longer than time. At the very edge of daylight, Orpheus turned. Eurydice, almost home, faded like mist returning to morning air. They say Orpheus kept singing. Even in loss, his song made the world kinder. The lesson is not only sorrow, it is also this: what love shapes in us stays, and softens even the hardest hours. On an island workshop, a father, Daedalus, crafted wings from feather and wax. He told his son, Icarus, to fly between, not too high, not too low. Balance is a wisdom that often arrives slowly. The boy felt the sudden joy of air, the sky felt close as laughter. Up, up he climbed, and the sun warmed the wax until the feathers loosened like sleepy birds. He fell toward the sea, which caught him with its old blue arms. People say this is a warning about pride, but it is also a whisper about kindness to ourselves, that we learn by doing, that we wobble before we walk, that the right height changes with each day. In a far off land, Perseus faced Medusa, whose hair twisted like living serpents and whose gaze could turn a person to stone. He brought a mirror like shield, not to charge, but to see wisely. He moved with patient steps, looking not at danger directly, but at the truth reflected around it. With careful courage, he completed what seemed impossible. The world often asks not for rushing, but for clear seeing, for a steady hand and a calm heart. Heracles, or Hercules, is remembered for strength, but his stories are also about endurance, repair, and beginning again. 12 labors, each a different kind of difficulty. He met monsters and tasks that felt larger than a lifetime. But listen closely and you will hear the subtle teachers inside the trials. Sometimes we must clean what has been ignored. Sometimes we must ask for help. Sometimes we must wait for the right moment, when the current carries us rather than exhausts us. Strength is not only muscle, it is also patience, apology, acceptance, and the quiet promise to keep going. After the fires of Troy dimmed, Odysseus began a journey home that bent like a river. He met winds that argued, seas that forgot which way was calm, and islands that asked riddles. There were sirens whose songs were beautiful but led nowhere. He listened safely, tied to his ship's mast, and let the music pass through him without carrying him away. There were giants and storms, and there were quiet evenings when the stars were so many they seemed to speak. Home, in the end, was not only a place, it was a recognition, a face, a door, a bed that remembered the shape of his sleep. The lesson is kind. Sometimes the path curves, but it curves toward us. The old names still walk with us in small ways. When you plan carefully, Athena sits beside you, nodding. When you find a melody that brightens a gray hour, Apollo is near. When you step outside and feel the moon's silver kindness on your face, Artemis is already there. When you set the table, light a candle, and make a room feel like home, Hestia warms the edges of the moment. And when you love and are loved, Aphrodite reminds you that beauty is not only seen but felt, quietly like breath moving through the body. The gods are not far. They are the names we give to qualities wisdom, music, wildness, earth, love that help us live. Imagine now a path of pale stone, warm from a day that's drifting away. On either side, olive trees, silver green leaves whispering. Their trunks are old, twisted kindly by time. The way hands can become more beautiful with use. A breeze comes from the Aegean, tasting faintly of salt and sunlight. Somewhere nearby, a lyre is being tuned. The strings offer small, patient notes. You pass a well, hear the bucket rope creak softly, and a swallow dips to taste the cool. Shadows lengthen. The stones remember the day and slowly let go of its warmth. You sit on a low wall, breathe in and out. The leaves applaud the evening. Ahead, a temple stands, columns simple and strong, holding up a roof that holds up the sky. On the steps, offerings of bread, figs, a cup of oil that catches a last ribbon of light. Inside, the air is still, a kindness for tired thoughts. You do not need to ask for anything here. You are already held. You leave a small wish anyway, not a demand, not a timeline, just a wish that knows how to wait. When you step back outside, the first stars have arrived, as if they, too, were waiting for you. We walk down to the shore. The sea is a silk dark blue. A small wooden boat rocks gently. You step in and lie back, looking up. The oars barely touch the water. The sound is the sound of sleep beginning. Above you, constellations. Orion keeps watch. Lyra hums a single bright note. Cygnus glides like a patient swan. The stories of the sky do not argue with time. They simply shine. You drift. There is nowhere else to be. As the boat moves, the myths gather themselves into gentle lessons. That beginnings can come from emptiness. That love hides and then reveals courage. That fire can be kindness. That even when troubles open, hope remains. That music remembers. That balance is a path learned by walking. That clear seeing is stronger than fear. That strength is patient. That a long road still returns home. You do not need to hold all of them. Choose one, or let them float like leaves on a slow stream. Sleep will choose with you. The boat nudges the shore, a shore of soft sand, a shore that feels like a familiar bed. You step out, and the sand cools your feet the way a good pillow cools your cheek. Ahead is a small house with a lamp in the window. Someone has prepared a bed just for you. Inside, the room breathes quiet. A breeze touches the curtain and sets it dreaming. You lie down. The sheets remember the shape of you. From far away, Mount Olympus is only a darker blue against the sky. The gods are not busy, they are simply at peace. In the hush, you hear a last whisper from the stories. Rest now, we will keep watch. Your breath has found its own soft rhythm, in and out, like waves on a patient shore. Your body is heavier, as if gravity were tucking you in. The mind, like a kind librarian, closes the book for now and places it gently on the nightstand. Sleep approaches the way dawn approaches from the other side, slowly, certainly, kindly. Good night, traveler. May Athena bless your thoughts, Apollo warm your dreams, Artemis guide your steps under the moon, and Hestia keep the small flame that protects your rest. Sleep well.
Welcome, and thank you for joining me tonight. As you settle into bed, allow your body to relax and your mind to drift into a different time. A time when the northern seas were alive with wooden ships, their sails catching the cold wind, their crews gazing across the horizon, searching for lands and opportunities. These were the Vikings. Sailors, traders, explorers, and warriors, but also farmers, storytellers, parents, and children. For centuries, they shaped the course of Europe, leaving behind a legacy that still captures our imagination today. Tonight, we will journey into their world, not with the noise of battle or the clamor of conquest, but in a calm, steady way, letting the story unfold like the tide against a quiet shore. The word Viking itself did not mean a people, but an action. To go a Viking was to set out on an expedition, a voyage for trade, exploration, or sometimes for raiding. The men and women of this culture were not called Vikings in their daily lives. They were Norse, the people of Scandinavia, of present day Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. For much of their lives, they were not warriors, but farmers. They raised cattle and sheep. They grew barley and rye. They lived in small villages scattered along deep fjords and sheltered valleys, and yet the harsh northern climate and the rugged land meant that farming alone could rarely provide enough. The sea therefore became their companion, their highway and their hope. Picture a narrow wooden home, its roof made of turf and timber, smoke curling gently from the fire inside, children running across a frozen path, wrapped in wool, their laughter carrying over the snow, fishermen pushing small boats into icy waters, the smell of salt and seaweed mixing with pine from the surrounding forests. This was daily life in early medieval Scandinavia, and in these surroundings a culture of resilience and skill grew. To survive here meant to be strong, inventive, and deeply connected to both land and water. The Norse learned to craft ships that could glide across rivers as easily as they could cut through the open sea. They carved intricate designs into wood, told sagas by firelight, and passed down myths of gods and giants, of faith and honor. It is important to remember that the Viking Age, usually marked from the late 8th century to the mid 11th century, did not begin with violence alone. Before the famous raids on monasteries, these northern people were already sailors and merchants. They carried furs, amber, and iron south, and returned with silver, wine, and fine cloth. Trade, exploration, and the need for survival were just as central to their story as the raids that would make them infamous. The geography of Scandinavia shaped everything.
Long, jagged coastlines with deep fjords meant that travel by water was often easier than travel by land. Forests provided timber for ships, while iron from the earth supplied tools and weapons. The winters were long, dark, and unforgiving, yet the brief summers allowed intense bursts of farming, fishing, and preparation for the cold months ahead. As we drift deeper into their origins, imagine the stillness of a Scandinavian night more than 1,000 years ago. The air sharp with frost. Above, the northern lights shimmering across the sky in waves of green and violet. In the distance, the low sound of the sea against the shore. And within small wooden halls, families gathered around the earth, sharing food, warmth, and stories of gods who shaped the world. It was the soil in which the Viking Age began to grow, a mixture of necessity and opportunity. A people who learned to look beyond their rugged homeland, who built ships to carry them across the known world and beyond. And though history would remember them for their raids and battles, it is here, in their homes, their fjords, and their stories that we find their true beginnings. And so our journey starts, not with war, but with the steady rhythm of daily life, the strength of families bound together against the cold, and the restless pull of the sea, calling them toward horizons yet unseen. As the 8th century drew to a close, the world beyond Scandinavia began to notice the Norse. The year was 793, when monks on the island of Lindisfarne, off the coast of England, looked out to the sea and saw longships approaching. At first, they may have thought them to be traders, for the sight of ships was not uncommon. But soon the air filled with cries and the clash of iron. The monastery was attacked, its treasure taken, and its reputation for holiness offered no protection. This raid shocked Christendom. The chronicles called it a great disaster, a sign of punishment, even the wrath of God. And with that moment, the Viking Age is often said to have begun. Yet, to the Norse, this was not the start of something new. It was a continuation of what they had always done, to travel to seek opportunity where it could be found. Their homelands offered limited wealth, but across the sea lay fertile lands, rich towns, and undefended monasteries filled with gold, silver, and books written in languages the Vikings did not know. The strength of the Norse lay not only in their bravery, but in their ships. The longship was unlike anything Europe had seen, long and narrow with a shallow draft. It could travel across oceans, yet also slip into rivers and land on shallow shores. With both oars and sails, it moved swiftly, silent at times, unstoppable at others. These ships allowed small bands of warriors to strike with sudden force, vanish and return home with spoils. Imagine the sight, a line of carved dragon heads rising on the horizon, the rhythmic beat of oars dipping into the water, sails of wool dyed red or striped with simple patterns, filling with the wind. For those on shore, the vision was terrifying. For the Norse themselves, it was a source of pride, of adventure, and of survival. Over the decades that followed, raids spread outward. England, Ireland, and Francia felt the sting of sudden attacks. Villages were burned, churches looted, and treasures carried north. But it was not only violence. As time passed, Vikings began to stay longer, to build settlements, and to carve out new homes far from their fjords. In Ireland, they founded Dublin, which grew from a Viking base into a thriving town. In northern England, they established the Danelaw,
regions under Norse control where their laws, language, and culture took root. Across the seas, they sailed to Iceland, where a volcanic land and open skies gave them a fresh start. From there, Greenland would be settled, and even further west, the shores of North America would be touched by their voyages. To the east, the rivers of Russia carried Norse traders deep into the lands of the Slavs. There they became known as the Rus, a name that would eventually give rise to Russia itself. Their ships carried them south to the Black Sea and even to the gates of Constantinople, where they traded furs and amber for silks, spices, and silver. Some served as mercenaries in the Byzantine Emperor's guard, earning fame as fierce and loyal warriors. It is easy to think of Vikings only as raiders, but their expansion was more complex. They were explorers, settlers, and merchants as much as fighters. A Viking voyage might return with silver coins from the Islamic Caliphate, glass beads from the Mediterranean, and stories of lands beyond imagining. Their world stretched from the cold shores of Newfoundland to the warm markets of Baghdad. And though they were feared, they were also welcomed for trade, for alliances, and for the unmatched skill at sea. Picture a Viking longship pulling into a quiet English river at dawn. The mist rising, the sound of water dripping from oars. Men step ashore in leather and wool, their axes at their sides, their eyes searching the horizon. Behind them, villagers stir awake, unaware of what is coming. For the Norse, this was not cruelty alone. It was survival, opportunity, and ambition, carried out upon the waters that had shaped their lives since birth. In time, the raids of the Vikings would become part of European life, dreaded and sometimes even negotiated. Kings paid Danegeld, a tax of silver to keep the Norse away. Some communities resisted, some adapted, and some became interwoven with the newcomers, marrying, trading, and building together. The Viking expansion was not only about plunder, it was about movement, about a restless energy that carried them across continents. It was about young men and women leaving their homes, uncertain of what they would find, but unwilling to stay still. As we leave this chapter, imagine again the longship upon the sea. Its sail full, the waves rising and falling beneath its keel. The horizon stretches endlessly, and on that horizon lies both danger and promise. For the Vikings, to step aboard was to embrace both, and in doing so they carried their world far beyond the fjords, leaving a mark on history that would never fade. When we hear the word Viking, it is easy to think only of raids and warriors, but most of the Norse people lived quieter lives. They were farmers, craftsmen, mothers, fathers, children, people who cared for animals, built homes, and tended fields beneath northern skies. A typical Norse household was built of timber, stone, oak, or turf. These were the longhouses, narrow rectangular structures sometimes stretching more than 20 meters. Inside, the air was warm with smoke and firelight. At one end, animals might be kept for shelter during the harsh winter months. In the center, a long hearth burned steadily, providing both heat and light, its smoke curling upward to escape through a vent in the roof. Families lived closely together. Parents, children, grandparents, and even extended kin often shared one roof. The rhythm of life was shaped by the seasons: planting and harvesting, hunting and fishing, repairing tools and preparing stores for winter. Children helped from an early age. They learned to spin wool, to fetch water, to gather firewood. Boys might practice with wooden swords, while girls might learn weaving or the tending of livestock. Yet roles were not always fixed. Norse women had more rights than many of their European neighbors. They could own property, request a divorce, and manage farms when men were away on voyages. Daily meals were simple but hearty. Stews of meat and root vegetables simmered slowly over the fire. Bread made from barley or rye was eaten with butter and cheese. Fish was common, as were dried fruits and nuts when available. Ale was brewed from grain and mead. Honey mixed with water and fermented was prized at feasts. In summer, fields of barley waved in the wind. In autumn, families worked together to preserve food for the long dark winter. Every task was done with care, for survival depended on it. Religion was deeply woven into Norse life. They believed in a world watched over by powerful gods and shaped by fate. Odin, the All-Father, god of wisdom and war. Thor, the Thunderer, protector of humankind. Freya, goddess of love and fertility, and many others, each with their stories, their gifts, and their demands. At night, families told sagas around the fire. They spoke of Asgard, the realm of the gods, and Midgard, the world of men. They told of giants who threatened to undo the cosmos, and of heroes who fought bravely, even knowing their destiny. At the heart of it all was the idea of fate, that one's life was woven by the Norns, the weavers of destiny, and that courage in the face of fate was the highest virtue. Norse religion had no great temples like those of Rome or Greece. Instead, sacred spaces were found in groves, near stones, or at simple wooden shrines. Sacrifices of animals, food, or valuable goods were offered to honor the gods and seek their favor. Festivals marked the seasons, midwinter, harvest, the coming of spring, each a time of gathering, feasting, and honoring the unseen powers. When someone died, they were often buried with objects they might need in the afterlife. Weapons, jewelry, tools, or even entire ships. To the Norse, death was not an end but a passage. Warriors might hope to reach Valhalla, Odin's hall, where the brave feasted eternally. Others might journey to Folkvanger, Freya's field, or the shadowy realm of Hell. Life was not only about survival, it was about order. The Norse practiced a system of law and assembly known as the Thing. At these gatherings, disputes were settled, laws were made, and justice was carried out. The Thing was both practical and symbolic, a reminder that even in harsh land, community and fairness matter. Disputes could be fierce, yet they were resolved through compensation, negotiation, or sometimes exile. Honor was a vital currency, and reputation could mean more than wealth. Despite their rugged lives, the Norse people valued beauty. They carved wood with intricate designs, twisted silver into bracelets, and decorated weapons with detailed patterns. Ships bore dragon-head prows, both to intimidate and to show craftsmanship. Even simple tools were often adorned with care, a sign of pride in creation. Storytelling, too, was an art. The sagas, though written down later, were born in these long houses. Tales of gods, heroes, and ancestors, recited in rhythmic verse to hold memory alive. So when we imagine the Vikings, let us not think only of raids and battles. Let us picture the quiet hearth, the laughter of children, the voice of a skald reciting poetry in the firelight. Let us hear the crackle of logs, the distant howl of winter winds, gentle rhythm of life lived close to nature. For in these homes and fields, in their faith and families, the Norse found meaning.
And it was from this foundation, from the strength of daily life, that they set sail across the world. Throughout the Viking Age, many names rose to the surface, some recorded by chroniclers, others remembered through sagas and legend. These figures, whether entirely historical or part myth, became symbols of the restless Norse spirit. Tonight we will meet a few of them, not with the clamor of battle, but in calm reflection, listening to their stories as if told by firelight. The first is Ragnar Lodbrok. His story lies halfway between history and myth, yet he is among the most famous of all Vikings. The sagas tell of Ragnar as a great warrior and king, clad in a coat of rough wool and leather, lined with tar and pitch to protect him in battle. They speak of his cunning raids across France and England, of his many sons who would themselves become legendary. It is said that Ragnar once led an attack on Paris, sailing his longships up the river Seine. The Frankish king, overwhelmed, paid him a ransom of silver and gold to leave. Whether every detail is true or not, the memory of Ragnar captured the imagination of Europe. His death, too, is wrapped in legend. Some tales say he was thrown into a pit of serpents by the Northumbrian king, where he died defiantly, reciting verse as the snake struck. Others say his sons avenged him with a great heathen army, a force that swept into England in the late 9th century, leaving its mark on history. Whether man or myth, Ragnar embodies the Viking archetype, bold, restless, larger than life. From saga to history, another figure takes us further west. Leif Erikson, son of Erik the Red, was born in Iceland and raised in Greenland. He inherited his father's spirit of adventure but carried it even farther. Around the year 1000, Leif set sail across the cold Atlantic. Guided by stories of land glimpsed to the west, he reached shores no Norseman had seen before. He called it Vinland, the land of wild grapes and fertile soil. Historians now believe this was in North America, perhaps the coasts of Newfoundland. Imagine the journey: weeks at sea, the endless horizon, the creak of wood, the snap of sails. At last, land rising from the mist. Forests, rivers, and beaches untouched by European feet. Leif and his crew built small shelters, explored the new country, and gathered supplies before returning home. Though the settlement did not last, his voyage stands as a remarkable achievement. Centuries before Columbus, a Norse explorer had reached the New World. Leif Erikson remains a symbol not of conquest, but of exploration, of courage to sail beyond the known. Our final figure lived at the end of the Viking Age, Harald Hardrada, whose name means hard ruler, was born in Norway in the early 11th century. As a young man, he fought in battles at home, but his path soon carried him far abroad. Exiled from Norway, Harald traveled east, entering the service of the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople. There he joined the Varangian Guard, an elite band of warriors known for their loyalty and ferocity. For years he fought across distant lands from the Mediterranean to the Holy Land, gathering both wealth and fame. Eventually he returned to Norway, where he claimed the throne and ruled as king. Ambitious still, he looked to England. In 1066 he sailed with a great army to press his claim. At first, victory was his, but at Stamford Bridge he faced the English king Harold Godwinson. There Harald Hardrada fell in battle, struck down on the field. Historians mark his death as the end of the Viking Age. For though Norse influence continued, the era of raids and great expeditions was fading. replaced by kingdoms and nations more settled, more bound by the new order of Europe. Ragnar the half legend, Leif the explorer who touched distant shores, Harald the warrior king who stood at the twilight of an age. Together they show us the many faces of the Norse spirit, fierce, ambitious, courageous, and bold, and yet beneath their names were countless others, men and women whose stories were never written down, but who shared in the same courage, the same longing for more than the world at their doorstep. As you listen, let your mind wander across seas and centuries. Hear the voices of skalds chanting sagas, the creak of long ships drifting at anchor, the silence of forests broken only by the crackle of fire. The Viking Age was not one story, but many, and its memory endures because it speaks to the human desire for adventure, for belonging, and for legacy. The Viking Age, stretching from the late 8th century to the mid 11th, left marks across continents. Traces of it remain not only in ruins and artifacts, but in languages, laws, and even the bloodlines of Europe. To this day, the name Viking stirs images of longships and distant seas. In England, the Norse settled in large numbers, especially in the north and east. They left behind names still visible on maps, towns ending in B, meaning farm or settlement, and Thorp, meaning village. Words of Old Norse slipped into the English tongue, simple words like sky, window, egg, husband, law. The languages blended just as the people did. In Ireland, Dublin grew from a Viking trading post into a city that endures today. In Normandy, the land of the Northmen, Norse settlers became so firmly rooted that their descendants would later cross the Channel as Normans, reshaping England in 1066. To the east, the Rus founded towns that became the centers of future kingdoms, their trade routes stretching toward Byzantium and beyond. Silver coins found in Scandinavian graves reveal the vastness of their contacts, reaching as far as the Islamic Caliphate. The Viking Age was also a time of great change in belief. At its beginning, the Norse prayed to Odin and Thor, made offerings in groves and by stones, and told sagas of gods who would one day fall at Ragnarok. By its end, Christianity had spread across Scandinavia. Kings and missionaries brought new faith, and slowly crosses replaced hammers of Thor. Churches rose where groves once stood, and the old stories lived on mainly in poetry and memory. The shift was not sudden, nor was it simple. For centuries the two beliefs coexisted, woven together in ways both subtle and deep. The death of Harald Hardrada at Stamford Bridge in 1066 is often called the end of the Viking Age. Only weeks later, the Normans, themselves descended from Norse settlers, would conquer England. The world was changing. Large kingdoms grew stronger, trade routes became safer, and the old ways of raiding lost their place. Yet the Norse spirit of travel and exploration did not vanish. It had already carried them across oceans and into distant lands. It lived on in the cultures they touched, and in the stories that continued to be told by skalds and chroniclers. When we think of the Vikings today, we often picture fierce warriors and stormy seas, but their true legacy is far broader. They were builders of towns, makers of laws, tellers of stories. They were ordinary men and women who shaped extraordinary history. The sagas written down centuries later in Iceland preserve their myths and memories. Through them we hear not only of gods and battles, but of honor, family, and faith. And we are reminded that these were people not so different from us, bound by love, ambition, struggle, and hope. So as we close this journey through the Viking Age, let us set aside the clamor of raids and the clash of swords. Instead, picture a longship at anchor in a quiet fjord,
The water is still, reflecting the moonlight. The crew has gone ashore, their voices soft around the fire. The air is filled with the scent of pine and smoke, the sound of waves lapping gently against the hull. The Viking Age has ended, yet its echoes remain, in language, in legend, and in the quiet reminder that even in harsh lands, people dreamed of more, of horizons beyond sight, of lives beyond their own. As you drift into sleep, let those echoes guide you. Let the sound of the sea carry your thoughts. And may the courage, the stories, and the journeys of the Norse remind you that history is never far away. It lives in us as a memory, as legacy, and as dream.